Noor Tagouri, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Aisha.
It's great to have you here with us. As someone who wears the hijab, I feel like we have to start with this moment we find ourselves in, and
Mm,
I'm specifically referring to events in Iran, where we see women and girls protesting against the strict dress codes, the mandatory hijab rules there in that country. When you see these pictures
yeah.
that have flooded our feeds and our TV screens, what goes through your mind?
Whoa. Well, the first time I heard about the story of Mesa Amini, I like felt something in my body that was there was something that was different. And it was rooted, I believe, in like one, that it was just it's such a tragic incident, but it was also an incident that was carried out by what is called the morality police. And I
The
kept
so-called.
trying to, the so-called morality police, right? And I kept trying to like figure out why that felt so activating for me. And it was because I realized the morality police, just because this one was made official by a government, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist everywhere. And that the morality police doesn't like exists in our families and our friends and our communities and our schools and our governments. And so it felt so heavy. And I've been thinking about this a lot because, I mean, even in the history of Iran, like there's been a back and forth with the hijab, whether it was mandatory or whether it
Mhm.
was actually mandatory that you would not wear it. Like that also is in Iran's history. And to me, it always comes down to this like fight for choice.
Yeah.
And so when I see the images and when I see the conversations that are happening, I'm really observing right now because I'm realizing that it's not about sides. It's about, are you someone who is actively fighting for people to be able to choose what they do with their bodies? Period. End of story. Like that's all it is.
And the hijab is just one example of that choice.
Of course, like it's not even it's like choosing to cover or not to cover. Like I had this huge breakthrough yesterday, really big breakthrough. And I started like speaking to myself in the mirror. I was like giving myself an affirmation, but like something came through me that was very like adamant that how I choose to cover, whether I choose to cover or not, really is no one's business. And the fact that like I may choose to cover my hair, if I choose to apply spirituality to this practice, to this act, then that's for me to do. But to everyone else, it's no one's business. Like to you, it should just be like a piece of fabric that covers my hair. But
Mhm.
that's how personal covering is for me. And I
And what does
realize
it
that,
mean to you? Just so I'm clear, because obviously it has different meanings to
yeah,
different people, but you in your personal space, what
yeah.
does it mean to you?
So covering to me is a daily choice. And I'm the journey that I'm on with it right now is because I will say like with everything that's been happening in Iran, like and hearing about the morality police, I really started to think about like how do I feel about this? Like how do I feel personally about like my daily choice? Do I feel like it's 100% my choice? Do I feel like there's pressure for me to cover? And I would be lying if I said that there was never any pressure. Of course there's pressure that exists,
Where does
especially if
that
you,
come from?
well, it comes from the community that I grew up in, and just like the fact that I grew up, and my family, like, and these are conversations that we're actually actively having in my family right now, which is so amazing because I don't think that the pressure is something that was ever always, it wasn't verbalized. It's more like just expectations. And um unfortunately that like collides with the fact that in the US Muslim women's bodies have been so politicized that it's really hard unless you do the work to understand like your active decision making around covering,
Mm-hmm.
because it does get influence. Like I actually just found, yeah, it does get influenced. It gets influenced. And so so right now where I'm at with that is that this morning I had a conversation with Adam, and we were
Adam's
talking
your
about
husband.
Adam's my husband and business partner and all of the things. And we have conversations around this a lot. But like I just casually checked in with him today and I was like, today I choose to cover. And like that's my choice. And the reason I'm choosing to is because I had this conversation with a friend who who's Catholic, and was we were having a back and forth conversation about spirituality and religion, and like that it can be for us. Like even though our faiths have been often politicized or weaponized or whatever it is, like at the end of the day, faith starts with, especially like the faith that I choose to practice, always started um, from with the goal of love, peace, and humanity and connectedness. And I think I felt angry that people politicized our bodies and surveilled us for so long that there that those characteristics appeared in the people in my communities as well.
Could you ever foresee, and I realize the limitations of that question because we only know what we know now, but hypothetically, could you ever foresee a time where you chose not to wear the hijab? Does that
That's
exist
the first
within?
time anyone has ever asked me that on a podcast, but I think it's an interesting timing because maybe, who knows? Like, I really don't know. And that is so okay. Like, I'm completely taking that pressure off myself because I realize like every single day is a choice. My whole like my growing up, I always thought I was never going to wear it. And everybody in my family like always assumed that I was never going to wear it. And then when I did, it became a public thing very quickly. Like I ended up just kind of getting
How
thrown
old
into.
were you? How old were you when
I was
you chose?
15. I was 15, and it was only a couple years later that I started. I mean, it was the same year actually that I got my first job in journalism. I started working at a newspaper when I was 15 years old, right after I started covering. And then I homeschooled the rest of my high school, and I started college early to get myself a head start because I really wanted to be a journalist. And so my journey put me kind of at this in this weird forefront where my scarf became a companion in a way, but it also became like something that was always scrutinized, like from when I was a kid. And I realized that now I'm realizing all of these things now, which is why it's a little bit difficult for me to talk about it because
Sure.
I'm like, I'm still processing these thoughts. But
Mm.
yeah, who knows? Like I would never say, I'm never going to say that I'm going to wear it forever. And I'm never going to say that I'm not going to wear it forever. But I think that what I know for sure is that whatever choice that I make, the choice, which is a daily choice, it's a choice I make every day or every second, whenever I choose to put it on and leave my house, it's going to be a choice that I make because I want to. And that is what feels true to me.
So you touched a little bit on explicit or implicit pressures from family and community um, regarding choices. I think we all have those. Back to the point you made
Mm-hmm.
about us being policed, all of us in some ways, big and small. What stands out for you from your childhood, growing up in a town in Southern Maryland, Virginia, a Muslim Arab American? You know, you've hit some of these notes that existed in the
Mm-hmm.
background. Tell us about that.
Well, I was always like a really curious kid. I asked questions since I could speak. And so I I had a sense of who I was from a very young age, and I was very lucky and blessed that my parents saw that spark in me of curiosity, and they really nurtured it. Um, and also, I was aware that my family was different because my mom was the only woman who wore a headscarf amongst all of the moms and stuff. So I felt like a very strong embarrassment towards that. And we talk about it all the time. And um, she's so gracious about it because she's like, yeah, I didn't even know you felt that way, but like that totally makes sense. And I completely like, because we're now realizing we've also had parallel experiences. But yeah, as a kid, there was this I felt a lot of that, this shame of being different. And now as an adult, I'm realizing that it wasn't unwarranted, because I like years later I wrote a piece about this, but the high school that I went to had like a world history class, and they were teaching religion, and one of the assignments was like an assignment on Islam, and it was questions like about women's rights and um, practices during war, like ethics during war and stuff like that. And there was like a group of parents who protested against this assignment because a father, quote, caught his daughter doing this assignment.
Mm.
And that's when it really clicked to me that like the way that I was feeling wasn't unwarranted. There was my child self knew that this was something that was who my parents were was seen as different or foreign. And no kid ever wants to be different. So that exists in my childhood, but it's like I don't I don't hold that heavily. Like I hold that with such light now because I'm like, these are just little things that made me who I am. And I laugh about it with my family now, and we talk like I'm I have so much grace for that kid version of myself and so much grace for the kid version of my parents then, because they were
Mhm.
also young and they were like my age, and my mom was way younger when she had me. So um yeah,
Can
it's all good, but it all lays part of the foundation.
and can as we talk about foundation and who you are now, can you see the thread from that difference to today, which put you in this place of wanting to, can you see a thread? Can you see a moment? Can you see a specific incident or trigger that has that helped propel you to this place of being a journalist and storyteller with a specific focus on marginalized communities?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because one of the breakthroughs that I had recently about hijab, when on one of the days that I was like questioning more of why I wear it or what, like how it's been a companion to me, was that I know that one of the reasons, one of many reasons that I was meant to wear it during the years that I did was to gain this radical sense of empathy, because it really became like this superpower that I had where I could talk to anyone, like anyone, people who thought they hated me, I could talk to them and I could connect with anyone
Mm.
because there was this common ground of I know what it's like for my story to be misrepresented, and I will never do that to you. And I know how to approach it because my philosophy early on in my journalism career that I still carry till now is, how is the way that I cover the story going to impact the person or the community that I'm talking about?
Mhm.
And that came from a place of like seeing directly whether it was me or people in my community being harmed based on how stories were told. So this dance that I've done with like just becoming the journalist, the storyteller, the question asker that I am today is all rooted in this radical empathy that I would not have otherwise had. I wouldn't have been able to have empathy with the lens that I have now had I not had these experiences, because I wouldn't have known to this extent of what it is like to be somebody who is incredibly
Othered.
misrepresented, or
Yeah.
yeah, or one of the people. Because if I'm being so transparent, like I could easily get away with just looking like another white girl.
Yep.
And I really I I carry that so deeply, and I honor that because this empathy has also given me the space to connect with my ancestors. So when you ask me like why do I choose to wear it now? Like I think a huge reason that I do that is because it's a way that I've been connecting with my ancestors. The way that I've been connecting with my and the ones who are still alive. Like I was in Istanbul last week, and my grandmother is there right now. And we had a whole conversation about, like, I asked her, I was like, did you, when you were younger, did you ever feel pressured to wear it? Who was the first person in the family who started wearing it? And because she didn't start wearing it until she came to the US after having children. So um, it's been this like incredible connecting tool and almost like a way to reclaim the power of choice, because the power of choice is the path to freedom.
Agreed. I'm so moved by what you just said about the connection to ancestors. Half my family is Muslim, the other half is Christian.
That's like my husband's.
Is it really?
Yeah.
And I keep a foot in both camps and call myself more kind of multi-faith.
Yeah,
And
totally.
and that's where I sit, which is very confusing and enraging, I think, for some people. And again, back to your question of or your statements about choice, it should be my choice. But I realize why I firmly still keep my foot in that space of Islam. It's because of its connection to my family. It's because of its
Mm-hmm.
connection to my mother, who was very, very devout, and and I've covered the Hajj, and I've been to Mecca, and all of those things, and all of those things are important to me because of that legacy and
Mm-hmm.
that lineage. So that really spoke to me when you said that, and talking to talking to your grandmother, and pulling the pieces together. But you speak of seeing your mother cover, obviously your grandmother when she came to the States took the hijab. These are personal family examples. Externally, though, in the wider world, growing up where you did, I mean, we've talked about the importance, or we all these days we talk increasingly about the importance of representation and visibility.
Yeah.
I mean, what did you see? I mean, was there anyone who
No, there wasn't. I
you
mean,
to look
that's
at?
definitely not nobody that I looked up to. Like I mean, my biggest inspiration growing up was Oprah, and then
Yes.
people like Lisa Ling or Christiana Amanpour,
Hmm.
um, Barbara Walters, Soledad O'Brien,
None of
and
them are Muslim
yeah,
Arab American.
but it was totally. I mean, like I think as a young person, I didn't. I think Oprah was like the closest thing that I felt to, like, if she can do it, I can do it,
Sure.
because she was the first in so many and she broke so many barriers. Um, but I will say, like, it wasn't really until social media kicked off that I think we had access to seeing so many more people who quote looked like us. But that's also because, like, that's how we demanded space, and so I was able to create my own platform. Like, if social media didn't exist, I probably wouldn't be where I am today, which is having my own production company, producing my own series, and realizing, oh, I don't need a network, I don't need a three-letter agency. Like, I am the three-letter agency, like, and I have it, and guess what, it's called At Your Service, because this is how we tell stories: rooted in service, rooted in love, rooted in connection, rooted in empathy. Like, this is what we can actually take up this space and do what we want now. And I think that, you know, that really was just the divine timing of it. It was how when I was coming up in my career. But also, it's why it's what led me to doing, like, my latest body of work, my latest investigative series, Rep, which is like the
Mhm.
most important work that I've ever done, was because, like, for so long, Rep, like, behind the scenes, was called the representation series, because I had this question of, like, how has the misrepresentation or the lack of representation of Muslims and Arabs in American media impacted American culture and society as a whole? And that was my entry point question. That's what I thought it was all going to be about. It was going to be like this whole journey of figuring out what that actually looks like. And it transformed into this healing investigation, if that even makes sense, where I actually was able to examine what is my relationship with the stories I tell about myself, with the stories I tell of others, and what is our collective relationship with the concept of truth and objectivity. And that is where my brain is at right now and my heart is at right now. And it has completely um, changed how I look at representation because I don't think that representation is enough.
Mhm.
And um,
And when you say that, what do you mean? Representation, and are you saying representation and visibility aren't enough? What's the next step? Or what's the missing
there is
piece?
an oral historian that's featured throughout our series. His name is Zahir Ali. And he talks about like what we need in storytellers. And I'm going to try to remember what the three are. Um, he said, I believe it's representation is one thing, great, but further than just representation, we need authenticity. Is this story authentic to you and your experience? But we also need intimacy. And that is where I think that this concept of true representation that we're aspiring to exists within with like with authenticity and with intimacy as well, where we are actually actively building trust with people. We have an idea of like where they're coming from because we're reflective enough in our own experiences. And I think that it just like I don't know, to be frank, it's like the conversations that we have oftentimes around representation just like end at this like idea of DNI or diversity and
Yes.
inclusion
Yeah.
or some what I often call diversity and exclusion because you can feel the check mark. Like you can feel it when I mean, and I'm sure you've experienced this, but like I know when I'm hired as a like diversity hire. Like I know
Mhm.
when I'm being asked to be somewhere because
Oh,
and
absolutely.
it sucks. Like that feeling sucks because you're just like you show up and you're excited and stuff and you realize, oh, like I was here to like fit into something
Totally,
and it
totally. I'm
happens
here to give
because
you points for you to win points because I'm here.
yeah. And you notice that when like people try to like squeeze you into their box instead of allow you to be as big and bright and take up the space that you can command. And I think that in a lot of ways, that's why I believe it's so important for us to like produce our own stories, to start our own storytelling companies, for us to collaborate more and to be uh, more connecting as storytellers and realize that there's not only is there value in that, but something that I said early on in the series because of just this huge miracle that happened when I was uncovering my own familial history. But storytelling is a form of justice.
Mhm.
And I have seen with my own eyes in the last couple of years how telling the story of my family has brought a sense of closure and healing and also uncovered facts about actual political events that happened. And I'm specifically referring to this story that I open up the series with, which is that in 1986, President Reagan conducted an airstrike in Libya, where my family is from, and in an attempt to kill the dictator Muammar Gaddafi, and they ended up hitting an apartment complex that killed five of my family members.
Oh dear.
And it was in like telling this story and asking questions around this story that I literally ended up meeting by a miracle while speaking at Harvard University. One of the people in the audience, I mentioned this story, and she got up and she shared that she actually stood in my family's apartment building the next day after the bombing. And she was a
Wow.
reporter at that story, and she found the story that she wrote and talked about how hard it was to get it published and gave my family closure because she was there to see things that they weren't able to see. And so it just starts with like you asking questions about yourself and about your family, and then you realize the interconnectedness in how these stories actually paint the picture of the rest of your life around you.
And with rep, your latest body of work, it brings to focus the current or the enduring misrepresentation of Muslim Americans here in the US. What would you say are those principal mischaracterization stereotypes that still endure, that
Mm.
that you find most troubling?
You know, it's easy to answer that because I can tell you like, oh, the oppressed woman, oh, the terrorist, oh, the like oil hungry Arab man, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I'm so uninterested in talking about that though, because that's like we know these stereotypes and we know the tropes and we're all familiar with them. We've all engaged with them. We all laugh at the jokes. I even laugh at the jokes sometimes. At this point, I'm like, you know what? That was funny. Like sometimes it
So what
just,
are you challenging with the show? If not those tropes and stereotypes, what is Rep
I'm
challenging?
challenging, it's beyond stereotypes and tropes. It's actually about what is your personal relationship with the stories that are being told around you and with the stories that you tell of other people. I'm less interested in like where most people's minds go to when they think of a woman in a hijab or when they think of an Arab person or they think of a Muslim person or when we say the word terrorist, what we completely assume. Because I feel like we have that conversation so much and I personally don't feel the immediate change. And I guess what I'm really challenging is a- asking individuals, what role do you play in this problem? It's less about what the result of the problem is and more about what role do you play in it. And so I had to ask myself, like when it comes to the misrepresentation of Muslim people, what role do I play in this problem? And
What role do you play?
I I realized that I allowed myself to adopt a story of being a victim because because I had to actually I zeroed in on my own personal misrepresentation and how like even when I'm covered in a story or I'm interviewed for a magazine or whatever it is, like I've never been satisfied with an interview because every time I read the story, I'm like, is that how they really saw me? Because there tends to be this like story of, oh, she like has gone through these experiences of misrepresentation and this harm has happened to her and she wore the scarf and she still persevered, and I'm just like, but yeah, like bad things have happened to me and bad things happen to everyone, but I don't see myself as a victim, but I think I was because I had people like ask me really condescending questions, and I realized like when sometimes when I was being celebrated, it was it was still like almost passive aggressive. It was still like from this place of,
Victimhood?
yeah. And I had this like moment where I started to realize, I mean, there's so many moments throughout my life, but I remember the last corporate job that I worked at, my boss, I found out people were getting raises and like my whole team had been getting raises and I asked for a raise and he was like, like you're like the face of the company though. I thought that that would be good enough for you. I thought that would be enough for you. And I remember I
How
like
condescending.
completely broke down and I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, so I'm starting to realize now, like, this is how I'm being seen. And so I let myself feel small for a long time. And I let myself feel like I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for the hijab, or I wouldn't be where I am. Maybe I'm not as like great of a storyteller as I think I am. And then I started taking like putting the reins in my own hands. And I just knew I saw stories differently and I knew I saw journalism differently. I saw truth differently because of these experiences. And when I continued to ask myself like what role do I play in this problem? It was also like there's so many things. There was I actively choose not to tell stories about Muslim identity or Muslim people or Muslim representation because I never wanted to be typecast. So I would like I mean, I spent 4 years investigating the sex trade in the US. And I mean, I love that series and stuff, but like I just actively would choose stories that
The other
had
way.
nothing, completely the other way. Um, I I didn't ask like the questions in my own family or in my own community that I would ask outside of like that I would be bold enough to ask to a stranger, but I was still not asking them at home. Like there are these things that I'm still processing again, like why it's harder for me to talk about it. But um I just like brought it all back to like how can I change? How can I actively like go through growth and through healing? And does that actually make the difference? And honestly, my rep journey, which like started out with a very personal story and took me all over the world. It literally took me to different communities that I never thought I would relate to. That we have an episode where I interview like 11 Japanese elders who were interned in camps during World War II. And that, like, at the end of our conversation, one of the elders literally said, you know, that I empathize a lot with what's happening with Muslims, and what happened when Trump enacted the Muslim ban because we knew what, like, she was putting these, like, connecting these dots that I wouldn't have even done myself. And it made me realize, like, you know, maybe also one of the part of my role in the problem is like isolating stories and not realizing that every single one is interconnected if we allow it to be, if we give it the space to be. And so that was really where it took me, is like letting go of control, letting go of controlling a story, which I think that so many journalists do. And it's very trouble it's just troubling because the more you try to control a story, the more you're projecting your own bias on it.
Mm.
Even though I believe objectivity is a fallacy, because I think that that's a different thing, but like the more you're projecting your own story onto it instead of giving stories the space to breathe and reveal themselves to you. And so I think that that was part of my problem as well, is like I was controlling my own personal story of how I was being perceived because I wanted to be okay for my, like, whoever I was trying to get a job from or whoever I was trying to please with like my work.
You blend the journalism with activism, wanting to affect change in real time. Um, it is a blend, it is a melding that is uncomfortable for some consumers of news, for other journalists. How do you navigate that, the journalism and the
Mhm.
activism?
Well, I don't call myself an activist, but from the beginning of my career, I was always called an activist, and I used to be so offended by it because I even wrote a piece called "Blurred Lines: Activism and Journalism," and that was like maybe almost 10 years ago now. And I was offended by it because people were calling me an activist just because I wore the hijab. Like I was covering stories very objectively. I was doing like all of the journalistic ethics that I was taught by all of my white male teachers in journalism school. I applied them, but I was still getting called an activist. And I was like, this is like the worst thing that you can call a journalist, because you're taking like, it makes me feel less credible because that's, you're putting a bias onto the work that I do. So that's how I used to feel about it. And then I think that throughout my work, I really challenged like, what is this concept of objectivity? Can it actually exist? Because in order for something to be objective, there needs to be a standard. But that standard has tends to be the perspective of cis het white men.
Mhm.
So if that's who my news director was and I was pitching a story and they were like, oh well, this isn't really like important for our viewers, or this isn't like something we would cover, but I thought it was really important, then it's like it's something that he personally wouldn't cover. Like that's already a bias in itself. Not saying that every story needs to get approved or whatever it is, but it's like being able to recognize that no one can fully be objective. And actually, if we embrace understanding our own biases and perspectives instead of pushing them down, you can produce a really thoughtful story that's very truthful and articulate and quote unquote balanced without it being an opinion piece, but a more powerful and impactful piece because humanity is at the center of it. Because I think that that's really what it comes down to. I quote in the second episode of Rep, I interviewed a friend and mentor of mine, the woman who taught me everything I know about radio and audio. Her name is Vildana, but she goes by Sunny. And she came to the US when she was 13 as a Bosnian refugee. And Christiane Amanpour reported on the genocide in Bosnia. And I remember in college reading a book about women in journalism, and Christiane was quoted saying the importance of never drawing a false moral equivalence.
Yeah.
And that's when like everything clicked in my brain, where I was like, oh, that is truth telling, is being fair in your storytelling, but keeping humans at the center of it and never drawing a false moral equivalence. And if we can maintain that, then I think that that is actually the job of journalists. The job of journalists is building trust with people, is giving this space for the story to reveal itself. That doesn't mean that we have to go out here and say like, well, this is what I believe and I think that this person is right. I actually like completely suspended my beliefs of right and wrong while I was working with Rep, because I accepted that I wasn't going to find answers that ended in periods, that everything that I was pursuing was only going to lead me to more questions. And that's it. That's literally it. I call it the quest of a question because of that. Like I embarked on this quest, and regardless of what the stories that were being told were, I think at the end of the day, what we were challenging is like, what is objectivity and what is this notion of truth? And is there only one truth, or does everyone have their own individual truth? And do we have the capacity to give space to those truths? What about when those truths are harmful to other people? How do we contend with that? How do we exist in that space with others? And I'm still asking questions around all of that, but now I still don't call myself an activist. I try not to call myself anything anymore. Like I tell stories and that's what I'm comfortable saying. But when people do mention activism to me, I really believe that my approach to telling stories is that of an advocate. And who am I advocating for? I'm advocating for human beings to have the space and the ability to choose how they exist in this world, how they exist in their human bodies, because that's what we are. And this is, I quoted this, the artist Maimuna Yusuf said this in our episode, Muslim Cool. We are spiritual beings having a human experience, and nothing else is ever true. And if we can focus on that, then I feel good about the space that I'm in as a curious one and an honest one.
In addition to moving between podcasts and documentaries and with your production company at your service, you also have the foundation, the I See You Foundation, that you run with your mother. Tell us about that.
Oh, I love ICU. ICU started when I was 14 years old. So literally like almost 15 years ago. And my mom met this woman who was a survivor of domestic violence, and she had opened up a shelter, and she was actually herself living in the shelter as well. And we asked how we could be of service. And she said, like toiletry items and groceries. And so we started doing drives for toiletry items, and we started doing monthly grocery runs. So we would just like get their grocery list, and my mom was like such a champ at Costco. She would like lug around. She still does this, by the way, like lugs around so many like carts and stuff. And this just became like this familial activity. The shelter was in Baltimore. So even when we were in Southern Maryland, so we would make these trips up to Baltimore every month and deliver them. And it really evolved because it's so funny. I never really wanted to be on social media. and my mom had a Facebook and Twitter before I did, and I would use her Facebook to like stalk my friends in school and like talk to them and stuff. And she like kicked me off her Facebook and was like, just make your own, please
Get
stop.
your own.
And I was like, well, I just don't like the idea of this, whatever. So I eventually did, and I decided that I wanted to use it for good deed opportunities. And so I would, every month when we were doing our grocery run, I would post these good deed opportunities. Um, and I would say we were doing our grocery run, and people that I knew were just contributing, and it sustained our monthly grocery runs. And I called it a good deed opportunity because it was like, here is an opportunity for you if you want to take it. It wasn't, nobody was doing anyone any favors. It wasn't favors. They were, if you want to be a part of this, this is an opportunity for you. And that really was like the philosophy of it. It was an opportunity for us to be of service. And eventually I remember we like I remember one winter it was so cold, and my mom called me crying and was like, we have to do something about this. People can't be out here in the cold. And so we got the idea of doing these winter care packages, which are like these really hefty care packages that have hoodies and thermals and flannels. And inside there's like a hygiene kit and a snack bag um, and toiletries and all of the things. And one, we would actively like go out into the community and pass these out, and we would ask them like, what do you guys need? Because I think that that's like, and whenever people ask about how they can do this in their own communities, I'm like, just go and ask people how
Well,
you
and
can be
that's
of
what they need.
service.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like we can't assume that. Like I didn't, for a while our care packages didn't include toilet paper until we asked, and we found out that like toilet paper and socks are like number one on people's lists when they're experiencing homelessness. So we asked this older couple what they needed, and the woman just looked into my mom's eyes. I remember this. It was so beautiful, in DC, and she said, we just need to be seen.
Mm.
And so we called the foundation I See You in response to this woman. And then we became a 501(c)(3), and we continue
Amazing.
doing the winter care packages every season. And it's all literally donation on like social media. And it's been so cool because people have really just trusted us with this. And earlier this year, we opened up our first community pantry in
I
Prince
saw
George's
that.
County, Maryland.
Mm.
Yeah. And so my mom, that's like where she works out of now. She stocks it with food. And so whenever people need toiletries or food in the community, they can come through, and we have it stocked.
It's beautiful. This
Yeah.
work that you're doing, it's important, it's impactful, not just in the wider world, but I'd assume to you personally. How is it changing you?
Oh my gosh, I'm completely transformed. I'm completely transformed. I mean, I would say in this year has been the biggest year of transformation for me, but also every day, like I said, like, and it's this active asking of myself, like, what do I choose today? What do I choose today? Um, I really love this, like, embracing the power of choice, because it really strengthens everything that you believe in and everything that you stand in and the power that you stand in. I even say, like, if there's something that I believe, like, I choose to believe this because I recognize that not everybody believes it. Like, and there's power in saying I choose to believe. So um I question everything. I I give myself so much more grace. I feel a lot more deeply. And I feel like I finally have found the community that I was looking for. After rep, I started something called Rep Club, and it's 40 people around the world. And I wanted to like create this intimate group that it's kind of like a book club, but for rep. And every Sunday we meet after listening to an episode of the week. And it has been, I mean, the most phenomenal experience, because it's everybody going on their own rep quest. And they're people from every country you can think of. And they've showed up to, like, some people are even actively traveling the world finding their families. Like, they've chosen to embark on this quest, and people from completely different backgrounds. and beliefs, and still we are all on this like vibration of understanding. And I realized like, oh, community is something that you can actively create and
That's
build.
right.
And it doesn't have to be like, I used to, when I would refer to my community, I used to just like, it used to be like, I'm talking about like American Muslims or Arab Americans, but there's a lot of American Muslims I don't relate to. And like, I'm not, that I don't practice like there's so much diversity even within that. So that's even in itself, like, not, it's just something that's evolving for me. And I realized, you know what? It wasn't until after Rep Club started that I was like, oh, this is the community that I've been looking for. So
Mm.
it's, so part of that transformation is that you don't have to be in this journey alone. And I felt, even though I had such an amazing support around me, like when you have really big breakthroughs and you start questioning everything, you start questioning everything you've ever believed, which is what I'm actively doing right now. It can be like a very lonely place because you can start your relationship starts shifting because you're changing and you're evolving, and you don't have to go through that alone. You don't have to be alone in that, and there are people somewhere on the planet who are actively doing the same thing, and I have found a group of them, and I mean, I had never looked forward to Sunday mornings so much as I have. And so in this transformation I realized like that when you choose to let go of control, you choose to trust yourself to show up for yourself, everything, like, the story writes itself more beautifully than you can think. And the characters show up in ways that you may not have anticipated. And I welcome all of it. I welcome everything now.
No, Tagouri, what a beautiful conversation. Thank you. Thank you for sharing so personally and honestly.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.